Picture this. I'm watching $20,000 worth of my stuff getting unloaded from a moving truck when this woman in pristine white tennis shoes marches up my driveway like she owns the place. Orange construction tape is stretched across my property, and there's a cease and desist letter duct taped to my front door. "You're trespassing on HOA common area," she announces, waving a clipboard like it's Excalibur. I look around. This is literally the address on my deed, the house I just closed on yesterday. My kids are staring wide-eyed from the truck cab. The diesel fumes from the moving truck mix with the scent of pine needles as I realize this woman has moved my surveyor stakes. She's actually trying to steal my land on move-in day. "Ma'am, I own this property," she smirks. "Not the trail you don't. That's been ours for 15 years, and your little tree fort and fire pit are illegal structures. You've got 48 hours. What would you do if someone tried claiming your backyard before you even found your coffee maker? Drop a comment and let me know where you're watching from. Let me back up and tell you how I ended up in this nightmare. 3 months earlier, I was cramming 2 teenagers into a 2-bedroom apartment, counting every dollar after 20 years in the Army and a divorce that wiped out half my savings. But I'd been grinding contracts, saving every penny for one goal, giving my kids Jake and Emma the fresh start we all needed. This property was love at first click, 2.3 acres, century-old farmhouse, backing up to state forest. The listing photos showed this gorgeous walking trail winding through mature oaks, perfect for morning runs, evening walks, maybe teaching the kids some survival skills I'd picked up overseas. The previous owner was Dorothy, an 80-year-old widow who'd lived there 40 years. Sweet lady, kept chickens, knew every neighbor's name. The closing went smooth, maybe too smooth. Her nephew handled the paperwork, rushing through details like he had somewhere better to be. "Aunt Dorothy kept things simple," he said. "No complications." Famous last words. Enter Margaret Thornfield, HOA president, real estate agent, and walking nightmare wrapped in designer workout clothes. Picture the most entitled soccer mom you've ever met, then give her legal authority over your property. Her house dominated the cul-de-sac like a suburban palace, complete with circular driveway and lawn so perfect it looked computer-generated. The vanity plate on her white BMW said, "HOA Queen. I wish I was making this up." While movers are hauling my life out of cardboard boxes, Margaret materializes with her laminated map of lies. She'd obviously doctored it. You could literally see correction fluid where she'd redrawn property lines. But she waves it around like Moses presenting the 10 Commandments. "This trail has been community property since we formed the HOA, she announces. The crunch of gravel under her pristine tennis shoes somehow sounds threatening. "Your structures violate architectural standards. $200 daily, starting Monday." My kids' laughter from the backyard died instantly. 3 neighbors watched through blinds like this was dinner theater, but nobody moved to help. Only Frank, an elderly man across the street, managed a supportive nod before Margaret's death glare froze him solid. "I have connections at the county," she adds, letting that threat hang in the humid air like smoke from a warning shot. 20 years in the military teaches you to recognize when someone's declaring war. Margaret wasn't just stealing my land, she was betting I'd fold rather than fight. She picked the wrong veteran. The moving truck disappeared down our street, leaving me surrounded by boxes and facing my first enemy in what was supposed to be our sanctuary. Margaret smiled that predator smile and walked away, probably already planning her next move. She had no idea I'd spent 2 decades learning how to win battles that looked unwinnable. 48 hours. Margaret's countdown had begun, and she wasn't bluffing. Monday morning brought the full suburban assault. Margaret filed her formal HOA complaint before most people finished their coffee, but that was just the opening move. Her book club transformed into a surveillance squad, 3 women in matching sun visors, armed with digital cameras and measuring tapes, documenting my violations like they were investigating a federal crime scene. I'm talking about grown women photographing my garbage cans from multiple angles, measuring my mailbox height with carpenter's precision, even counting the dandelions scattered across my front lawn. One of them, a nervous blonde named Diane, actually got on her hands and knees to measure the gap between my fence posts. Margaret's strategy was sophisticated for suburban warfare. She produced witness statements from 3 neighbors, swearing they'd used the community trail for recreational purposes since 2008. These weren't casual handwritten notes. We're talking professionally typed, notarized documents loaded with legal terminology that screamed, "coached by someone who binge watches court TV." The statements claimed regular community maintenance, shared expenses for trail improvements, and established precedent for public access. Margaret even included a timeline showing seasonal cleanup efforts and winter snow removal. It looked official enough to fool most people, but Margaret had picked the wrong target. 20 years of military paperwork teaches you something valuable. When bureaucrats lie with documents, they always leave contradictory paper trails somewhere in the system. Tuesday morning found me at the county courthouse inhaling that distinctive cocktail of musty filing cabinets and burnt government coffee that every veteran recognizes. The records clerk, a patient woman named Betty, who'd apparently helped every property dispute since 1987, guided me through filing systems that belonged in a museum. 6 hours later, surrounded by survey maps and incorporation papers that made my eyes water, I struck bureaucratic gold. The HOA incorporation papers, filed March 15, 2015, sat right there in black and white. Margaret's community maintenance claims dated back to 2008, 7 years before her precious HOA even legally existed. I'd learned this verification trick during a deployment in Afghanistan, where locals constantly claimed traditional land rights that predated their actual governing structures. But the real treasure was my original 1987 property survey, preserved in the county vault like some kind of legal artifact. Clean boundary lines, precise compass bearings, GPS coordinates that any modern equipment could verify, down to the inch. The trail meandered completely within my property boundaries, every twist and turn documented with surveyor's mathematical precision. The documents were so clear, even Margaret's book club could understand them. That evening, as September shadows stretched across my driveway, Frank materialized at my mailbox like some kind of property rights guardian angel. This 70-year-old neighbor had been watching Margaret's theatrical performance for years, and tonight he'd finally reached his breaking point. "Son, I got something you need to see," Frank said, clutching a manila envelope with hands that shook slightly from age but gripped with determination. "My daddy built that trail back in 1963 with a borrowed bulldozer, trying to reach the old fishing pond before it dried up." Did you? Frank's envelope contained photographic evidence that made Margaret's timeline completely impossible. 1950s aerial photographs showing the trail as a private farm road, cutting through empty farmland decades before any suburban development existed. His father had followed the natural ridgeline to avoid seasonal wetlands, basic engineering principles that anyone could verify on modern topographical surveys. "Dorothy let folks walk it out of pure Christian kindness," Frank continued, his voice carrying the weight of someone who'd watched his neighborhood transform. "But she never signed away nothing to nobody. Margaret's been telling that community property story so long, I think she's started believing her own lies." Wednesday morning, I hired an independent surveyor with military-grade GPS equipment that could measure property boundaries accurate to within 3 inches. While Margaret's surveillance team watched from across the street like suburban meerkats protecting their territory, my professional spent 4 hours placing certified markers every 50 feet along the actual legal boundaries. Each orange flag represented coordinates that would hold up in any courtroom in America. I posted fresh, private property, no trespassing signs along the trail, and sent Margaret a certified letter demanding written proof of any legal easement rights. The return receipt showed she personally signed for delivery Thursday afternoon at 2:47 p.m., evidence that she'd received official notice of my position. Friday morning brought Margaret's response, and it wasn't legal documents. I caught Diane, her loyal lieutenant, measuring my mailbox height at 6 a.m. sharp. This grown woman stood in my driveway wearing a pink terry cloth bathrobe and rubber rain boots, wielding a metal tape measure in the pre-dawn darkness like some kind of suburban ninja. "Federal mailbox height regulations," Diane stammered when I opened my front door wearing nothing but boxer shorts and an old army t-shirt. "Could be a 1/4 inch over regulation standards." "Ma'am, it's 6 in the morning and that's federal postal property." From that moment forward, I documented everything with my phone camera. Margaret had just escalated from simple property harassment into potential federal mail tampering territory, and she didn't even realize she'd crossed that line. The war was officially on. Margaret wasn't done playing games. If anything, my legal documentation had triggered her nuclear option, and she was about to show me how dirty suburban warfare could get. Within a week, she'd somehow obtained my divorce records. Public information, sure, but the fact that she'd gone digging through court filings told me everything about her character. Suddenly, neighbors were whispering about my financial instability at the mailbox, questioning whether I could maintain property standards in their precious neighborhood. The smell of Margaret's vanilla candles hit me when I walked past her house each morning. She was burning through them like a stress response while orchestrating her character assassination campaign. Her book club evolved into a gossip distribution network, spreading carefully crafted rumors everywhere locals gathered. At the grocery store checkout, I heard Diane telling the cashier, "Poor man's probably overextended himself. Military divorces can be so financially devastating." Margaret's masterstroke was calling an emergency HOA meeting to discuss property line disputes threatening community values. She sent official invitations on cream-colored cardstock to every address, complete with agenda items that made my situation sound like a neighborhood crisis. 23 neighbors packed her living room, perching on white leather furniture that probably cost more than most people's cars. Margaret had prepared charts, property value graphs, and a PowerPoint presentation worthy of a Fortune 500 boardroom. Established communities maintain property values through consistent standards, she declared, clicking through slides showing before and after sale prices during boundary disputes. Her real estate background was on full display. She knew exactly which financial fears would terrify homeowners. Then came her secret weapon, Cousin Bradley, a real estate attorney in a suit that cost more than my mortgage payment. This guy's leather briefcase gleamed under Margaret's chandelier as he delivered his intimidation masterclass. Bradley discussed prescriptive easements and adverse possession in language designed to make regular folks surrender before the fight began. His basic message: Margaret's legal position was fortress strong, and I was a delusional newcomer destroying neighborhood harmony. Mr. Thompson has every right to enjoy his property, Bradley concluded with practiced sympathy, but established community precedent protects everyone's investment here. Margaret's final move, threatening a lien for 5 years of unpaid trail maintenance fees at $200 monthly, $12,000 plus compound interest and legal costs. But while Margaret played neighborhood prosecutor, I was conducting military-style intelligence gathering. Margaret had been busy with her real estate empire. 3 neighborhood houses sold in 2 years, each listing featuring community trail access as a premium selling point. Her marketing materials showcased professional photos of families hiking their private neighborhood trail. I spent a bourbon-fueled evening calculating real estate commissions. Conservative estimate: Margaret had earned an extra $30,000 fraudulently advertising access to my property. Each listing specifically mentioned wooded trail maintained by Homeowners Association as a key luxury amenity. During my 3rd trip to the county assessor's office, I discovered Margaret's most vulnerable secret, one that could destroy her completely. For 8 years, she'd claimed agricultural tax exemption on her property, designating portions as forested conservation area. The annual savings, roughly $4,000. Over 8 years, $32,000 in unpaid taxes. Here's the kicker. The conservation area on her official filings was actually 50 feet of my trail property, not hers. I'm staring at aerial boundary maps showing her fraudulent conservation claims extending deep into my legal property lines. Margaret hadn't just been stealing my land. She'd been using it to commit systematic tax fraud that would make the IRS very, very interested. Everything clicked into focus. Margaret's HOA presidency, her real estate schemes, her aggressive territorial behavior, all designed to protect a decade-long fraud operation that generated serious money. The crunch of gravel under my boots felt different as I walked my trail that evening, knowing I held evidence that could end Margaret's suburban kingdom. I contacted 3 families who'd bought houses based on her fraudulent trail promises. Their reactions were nuclear. 2 threatened lawsuits. 1 couple from California demanded their realtor's license number for state reporting. Margaret's empire was cracking, but she had no idea her foundation was about to collapse. I scheduled formal meetings with the county surveyor and tax assessor, organizing my evidence into a prosecution-ready case file that would make any JAG officer proud. Margaret thought she was playing neighborhood politics. I was preparing for total war. And in war, superior intelligence wins before the shooting starts. Margaret's desperation was starting to show, and desperate people make dangerous mistakes. 2 weeks after her HOA meeting disaster, only half the neighbors showed up, and 3 actually defended me. Margaret escalated to government harassment. She filed a complaint with county code enforcement claiming my kid's treehouse violated setback requirements and constituted an unpermitted structure threatening neighborhood safety. The treehouse. My kids had spent 3 weekends building it with scrap lumber and YouTube tutorials positioned 15 feet from any property line, well within legal requirements. But Margaret was betting that bureaucratic intimidation would succeed where her fake legal threats had failed. Friday morning brought Code Enforcement Officer Jim Martinez to my door, clipboard in hand and that government-issued expression of professional boredom. The smell of his coffee mixed with morning dew as we walked toward the treehouse, leaves crunching under our boots. "Sir, I've got to investigate every complaint," Martinez said apologetically. "Even the ridiculous ones." As we approached the treehouse, basically a platform with walls that any 8-year-old could build safely, Martinez stopped walking and started laughing. "You military?" he asked, noting my posture and the precision of the construction. 20 years, Army. Marines myself, 12 years before this job." Martinez measured the distances with professional equipment, shaking his head. "This structure meets every safety requirement in the county code. It's better built than most backyard sheds." Then Martinez dropped the bombshell that changed everything. "Ma'am filed 47 complaints in 2 years, he said, pulling out a tablet that apparently tracked Margaret's harassment history. "All dismissed. False reporting to code enforcement is actually a misdemeanor in this county. Carries fines up to $500 per incident." I felt my pulse quicken. 47? She's got neighbors scared to put up mailboxes without calling our office first. We've been building a pattern of harassment case, just waiting for someone willing to press charges. Margaret had unknowingly handed me a federal case on a silver platter, but her government harassment was just the warm-up act. That afternoon, I caught Margaret organizing what she called a neighborhood safety patrol. 3 book club members taking shifts to monitor my suspicious activities. These grown women were literally sitting in lawn chairs on the public sidewalk, logging my comings and goings in spiral notebooks like amateur detectives. When I left for the grocery store, they noted the time. When I returned with my kids, they photographed my license plate. When the pizza delivery guy showed up Thursday night, Diane actually approached him asking what he was delivering and to whom. My teenagers found it hilarious. "Dad, you've got your own stalker fan club," Emma laughed, waving at the surveillance team from our kitchen window. The final straw came Saturday morning. Margaret positioned her BMW to partially block my driveway, not completely, just enough to make backing out annoying and potentially dangerous. When I knocked on her door to ask her to move it, she claimed she was legally parked on a public street and suggested I plan better if I needed to leave my property. The metallic smell of her car's exhaust lingered in my driveway, mixing with Saturday morning bacon from Frank's house next door, a reminder that normal neighbors were watching this escalation with growing concern. That evening, Frank appeared at my fence line with information that shifted the entire power dynamic. "Son, you need to know Margaret's getting desperate for a reason," he said, glancing around like we were planning a covert operation. "Her husband's been staying at his dental office 3 nights a week. Neighbors are talking about divorce papers." Frank had been conducting his own intelligence gathering through the neighborhood gossip network. Apparently, Margaret's harassment campaign was destroying her marriage, her social standing, and her real estate reputation simultaneously. 2 of her recent real estate clients have filed complaints with her brokerage, Frank continued. Something about misrepresenting property amenities. Word is her boss called her in for a formal meeting next week. But Frank's best intelligence came from his wife's friendship with the postal carrier. Margaret had been intercepting delivery confirmations for certified mail, a federal offense that carried serious prison time. I realized Margaret wasn't just protecting her tax fraud scheme anymore. She was fighting to save her entire life from the consequences of years of systematic deception. Sunday morning, I installed professional security cameras covering every angle of the trail entrance and property boundaries. The system cost $800, but would provide evidence that could stand up in any courtroom. By noon, I'd posted an enormous, professionally printed survey map showing exact GPS coordinates of my property boundaries. The sign was visible from 3 houses and the main street. No neighbor could claim ignorance about the real property lines. Then I sent Margaret a formal cease and desist letter via certified mail, demanding she stop all harassment activities within 48 hours, or face criminal charges for stalking, trespassing, and filing false government reports. Margaret's 47 false complaints had just become evidence of a criminal pattern. Her tax fraud was documented with county records. Her real estate misrepresentation was being investigated by state authorities. The war had shifted from property disputes to criminal prosecution, and Margaret was fighting on too many fronts to win them all. Time to see how well her expensive cousin could defend against federal mail tampering charges. While sorting through the last of Dorothy's forgotten belongings in my musty basement, Christmas decorations that smelled like decades of storage, photo albums with yellowing pages, and boxes of paperwork the estate sale had somehow missed, I discovered the document that would destroy Margaret's entire empire. Tucked inside a manila folder labeled Important Papers, Electric Company, was a 1987 easement agreement between Dorothy's late husband and Central Valley Power. My hands actually trembled as I read the fine print by the harsh light of a basement bulb. The agreement was devastatingly clear. 25 years of exclusive utility access through what became my trail. 25 years from 1987 meant expiration in 2012, 3 full years before Margaret's HOA even existed. The basement suddenly felt electric with possibility. Margaret had been using this expired utility easement as the cornerstone of her established community use lies. Her expensive cousin Bradley had probably never seen the actual document, just relied on Margaret's fraudulent claims about existing rights. The musty smell of old paper mixed with my growing excitement as I realized what this meant. When utility easements expire without renewal, all access rights automatically revert to the landowner, me. No exceptions, no community precedent, no legal gray areas. I called attorney Sarah Jules immediately, my voice echoing off basement walls as I read the easement details over speakerphone. "This is nuclear," Sarah said, and I could hear papers rustling as she took notes. Margaret's entire legal foundation just vaporized. But here's the beautiful part. Claiming community rights based on expired utility easements constitutes fraud. Criminal fraud. That evening, hunched over my laptop with a bourbon that tasted like victory, I researched Central Valley Power's historical records. Their 1987 easement covered emergency line access during storms, period. No public recreation, no community transfers, no authorization for anything except utility trucks. Margaret had built her $60,000 fraud scheme on legally worthless paper, but discovering her current real estate listing made everything click into focus with terrifying clarity. Margaret's luxury renovation project, $850,000, hitting the market in 3 weeks. The listing description made my blood simmer. Stunning custom home with private community trail access through mature woodland preserve, exclusive amenities for discerning buyers. Her commission on this sale would exceed $24,000, money she desperately needed to justify years of fraud and harassment. The math was simple and damning. Tax fraud, $4,000 annually for 8 years. Previous trail-enhanced sales, $30,000 in inflated commissions. This upcoming luxury listing, $24,000 more. Margaret wasn't protecting neighborhood standards. She was defending a systematic criminal operation worth over $60,000. All built on stealing my property rights. I researched federal penalties until my eyes burned from screen glare. Tax fraud exceeding $30,000 carried potential prison sentences. Combined with mail tampering, false reporting, and real estate misrepresentation, Margaret faced what prosecutors call a pattern of criminal enterprise. Each individual charge was serious. Combined, they represented the kind of case that made federal attorneys salivate. My kids found me Sunday evening surrounded by legal documents, grinning like someone who'd just discovered the combination to a bank vault. "Dad, you look like you struck gold down there," Emma said. "Better than gold, sweetheart. I found justice with a side of federal prosecution." The basement felt different now, not like storage space for forgotten things, but like the command center where I'd discovered Margaret's fatal vulnerability. Margaret believed she held all the legal advantages, but her entire empire rested on an expired document that proved 8 years of systematic fraud. The power dynamic had shifted so completely that Margaret would need more than expensive lawyers to save herself. Time to watch her confidence crumble when she realized her criminal exposure was about to become very, very public. The next morning, fueled by 3 cups of coffee and righteous anger, I realized I wasn't fighting this war alone anymore. Margaret had been so busy terrorizing individual neighbors that she'd never considered what would happen if her victims started comparing notes. Frank appeared at my door Tuesday evening, but he'd brought reinforcements. Janet Morrison, a silver-haired retired teacher with eyes that could discipline a classroom full of teenagers, stood behind him clutching a manila folder like evidence in a murder trial. Beside her, David Kim from 2 streets over looked like he was ready to hack into Margaret's entire digital life. "Son, Margaret's been running the same con on half the neighborhood," Frank said, the smell of his wife's barbecue mixing with evening air that felt charged with possibility. Janet's story made my blood boil. That woman destroyed my home daycare business in 2019 with completely fabricated zoning complaints, 6 months without income, $3,000 in legal fees, all because she decided I was lowering property values by watching neighborhood children. Her folder contained official correspondence showing Margaret had filed 9 separate complaints using different names, all claiming Janet was running an illegal commercial operation. Every single complaint was dismissed, but the bureaucratic warfare had nearly bankrupted a woman who'd taught elementary school for 30 years. David's tech worker precision shone through his organized documentation. She sabotaged our fence permit by filing neighbor objections under fake signatures. I analyzed the handwriting. Same person wrote 5 different concerned neighbor letters. The beautiful part? David had video evidence of Margaret forging signatures at her kitchen table, taken accidentally while his wife was filming their toddler playing in their backyard. Lost our contractor, 8 months of delays, $5,000 in extra costs, David continued. But I've got her dead to rights on document forgery. We spent the evening at my kitchen table mapping Margaret's 8-year neighborhood terrorism campaign. Janet brought zoning correspondence. David had permit sabotage evidence. Frank contributed intelligence from his wife's grocery store reconnaissance network. The pattern was devastating. Margaret systematically targeted anyone who might challenge her authority, lower her property values, or compete with her real estate interests. Wednesday brought attorney Sarah Jules with legal documents that smelled like expensive law office leather and impending justice. "We're not fighting property disputes anymore," she announced, spreading papers across my dining room table. "We're documenting a criminal enterprise." Sarah's 3-pronged attack strategy was military beautiful in its simplicity. Quiet title action would establish my boundaries legally, $350 to file, but Margaret would pay my attorney fees when she inevitably lost. Criminal complaints for harassment and fraud would trigger both county and federal investigations. IRS whistleblower submission would launch automatic tax fraud investigation. Federal mail fraud carries up to 20 years prison time, Sarah added with professional satisfaction. Pattern evidence from multiple victims makes this a slam-dunk prosecution. But Frank's intelligence network had uncovered Margaret's crumbling empire faster than we'd expected. Her husband had officially moved out Monday, leaving a note on their front door that half the neighborhood saw. Dental practice cannot survive association with ongoing criminal investigations. 2 real estate clients had filed formal complaints with her brokerage. Her boss scheduled a performance review for Friday. Real estate industry code for "bring your resignation letter." Most deliciously, Margaret's book club had disbanded after members discovered she'd been using their meetings to plan harassment campaigns against neighbors. David's tech expertise revolutionized our documentation strategy. "Modern smartphones create admissible evidence," he explained, showing us apps that automatically timestamp and GPS coordinate photos. Every interaction, every trespass, every threat, document everything. Digital evidence destroys he said, she said defenses. I shared research techniques I'd learned during my military intelligence training. Government offices keep everything, but most people don't know what to ask for. Request complete property records, all correspondence, every filing. Bureaucrats can't hide what they're legally required to preserve. The takeaway that would help every viewer: public records contain everything needed to verify legitimate claims versus fraudulent ones, but you must specifically request complete documentation going back to original surveys. By Thursday evening, we'd established our property rights defense network with backing from the local veterans organization. The law school clinic volunteered students to help seniors navigate HOA disputes. We'd created a website documenting Margaret's methods and teaching other neighborhoods how to recognize and fight similar predators. Friday's planning session felt like a victory celebration before the war officially began. The crunch of autumn leaves under our feet as we walked my trail, my legally verified, federally protected, criminally defended trail, sounded like freedom. Frank summed up our transformation perfectly. Margaret thought she was picking on one isolated veteran. Instead, she created a neighborhood alliance with military leadership, legal firepower, and federal investigation backing. The scent of wood smoke from my fireplace mixed with the satisfaction of knowing Margaret was about to face justice from directions she never saw coming. Margaret had inadvertently armed her victims with everything needed to destroy her completely. Time for the counterattack. Margaret's world was collapsing faster than autumn leaves. But cornered predators are always most dangerous. Her next move proved she'd rather burn down the neighborhood than admit defeat. Saturday morning brought the sound of chainsaws and diesel engines roaring up my driveway at 7 a.m. sharp. I stumbled outside in my boxers to find Margaret directing a three-man crew with professional tree removal equipment, orange safety cones blocking my driveway like she owned the place. "Emergency neighborhood cleanup," Margaret announced, waving her clipboard with theatrical authority. "Fallen branch across the community trail poses serious public safety hazards." The fallen branch was actually a healthy oak limb that someone had obviously cut and positioned across my trail sometime during the night. Fresh sawdust clung to the bark, and tool marks were visible where they'd severed it from a tree that wasn't even on my property. Margaret's chainsaw crew was cutting through my fence post to access the hazardous debris. The screech of metal on metal as they destroyed my property line markers would have woken the entire neighborhood, which was probably Margaret's intention. "Ma'am, you're trespassing and destroying private property," I said, starting to film everything with my phone. "Public safety takes precedence over individual property rights," Margaret replied, clearly having practiced this legal-sounding nonsense. "As HOA president, I have authority to address community hazards." But Margaret had made a critical tactical error. My security cameras were capturing everything in high-definition detail. Her staged fallen branch, her crew destroying my fence, her directing criminal trespass like some kind of suburban crime boss. The real disaster came when her unlicensed chainsaw operators, rushing to complete their sabotage before neighbors woke up, accidentally cut into a tree on city property instead of my land. The massive oak they dropped crushed Margaret's BMW and blocked the public street for 4 hours. City fines started at $500 for unpermitted tree removal on municipal land. The towing and cleanup costs for blocking public right-of-way added another $1,200. Margaret's emergency cleanup had just cost her over $2,000 and created actual evidence of criminal conspiracy. Police Officer Williams, a patient veteran himself who'd clearly dealt with HOA drama before, took statements while Margaret tried to explain why she was conducting unauthorized tree removal at dawn on someone else's property. "Ma'am, do you have written permission from the property owner?" Williams asked, his notebook filling with Margaret's increasingly frantic explanations. "The HOA has established authority. Do you have legal documentation showing easement rights over this specific property?" Margaret's silence spoke volumes. Williams issued citations for trespassing, property damage, and filing false emergency reports. The criminal charges would be forwarded to the district attorney for prosecution review. But my security footage revealed Margaret's most damaging mistake. While directing her sabotage crew, she'd inadvertently confessed to staging the entire incident. The cameras captured her saying, "Make sure it looks natural. We need this to seem like an emergency cleanup, not property damage." Criminal conspiracy, documented in digital high definition. That afternoon brought Margaret's real estate crisis to full eruption. Her luxury listing client, a California couple relocating for tech jobs, arrived for their final walkthrough and found Margaret's BMW being extracted from beneath a fallen tree by emergency crews. "What exactly is happening here?" the wife asked, watching police tape off Margaret's emergency cleanup crime scene. Margaret tried explaining about routine neighborhood maintenance, but the husband was already on his phone with their relocation attorney. Within 2 hours, they'd withdrawn their offer and demanded immediate refund of earnest money. $24,000 in commission evaporated along with Margaret's real estate reputation. Tuesday brought the consequence Margaret had been dreading. Her real estate brokerage terminated her employment after clients filed formal complaints with the state licensing board. Her supervisor, Linda Martinez, met her in the parking lot to collect her access cards and listing signs. Multiple client complaints about misrepresented property amenities, Linda explained to neighbors watching through windows, plus criminal charges for property damage and trespassing. The brokerage can't risk association with ongoing legal issues. Margaret's professional life had officially imploded, but she wasn't finished destroying herself yet. Wednesday evening, Frank caught Margaret attempting to bribe County Surveyor Pete Rodriguez with a $2,000 cash offer to re-examine my property boundaries. Rodriguez, a 20-year government employee who took his professional integrity seriously, immediately reported the attempted bribery to his supervisor and local authorities. "Ma'am, what you're suggesting constitutes felony corruption of a public official," Rodriguez told Margaret while secretly recording their conversation on his county-issued phone. "I'm required to report this interaction to law enforcement." Margaret's response? She tried to increase the bribe to $5,000. Federal corruption charges now joined her growing list of criminal exposure. The FBI takes bribery of government officials very seriously, especially when documented with audio evidence. But Margaret's most desperate move targeted my family directly. She contacted my ex-wife Jennifer, trying to gather character evidence that could somehow undermine my property rights case. Jennifer, who'd remarried and moved on with her life, immediately called to warn me about Margaret's harassment. "Some crazy woman from your neighborhood called claiming you're involved in property disputes and criminal activity," Jennifer said. "She wanted details about our divorce, your finances, anything that might make you look unstable." Jennifer had hung up and blocked Margaret's number, but the attempted character assassination revealed how completely Margaret had lost any sense of legal or ethical boundaries. By Thursday, Margaret's support network had evaporated entirely. Her husband filed for divorce, citing criminal behavior damaging professional reputation. Her remaining book club friends publicly distanced themselves. Even her loyal Lieutenant Diane stopped returning phone calls after receiving a cease and desist letter from my attorney. Margaret was fighting alone now, facing criminal charges, federal corruption investigation, IRS tax fraud review, and civil lawsuits from multiple neighbors. Her real estate career was finished, her marriage was over, and her HOA presidency had become a liability that neighbors wanted eliminated. The smell of desperation was practically visible around Margaret's property. Trash cans overflowing, lawn neglected, newspapers piling up as her perfect suburban facade crumbled. But desperate people with nothing left to lose make the most dangerous enemies. Margaret's final gamble would either destroy me completely or hand me everything I needed to end her forever. Time to see which outcome her desperation would choose. Margaret's final week of freedom began with an act so desperate it would have been comical if it weren't so dangerous. Monday morning, I discovered she'd filed a frivolous lawsuit claiming I had stolen her trail maintenance investment and demanding $12,000 in compensation for 8 years of community improvements. And the filing fee alone cost her $300 she clearly couldn't afford, but Margaret was past caring about money. This was about destroying me before I could destroy her. Her handwritten complaint, filed without attorney representation since Bradley had dropped her faster than a hot grenade, read like the manifesto of someone completely detached from reality. She claimed my property ownership was fraudulent, my boundary markers were illegally placed, and my security cameras constituted surveillance harassment of law-abiding neighbors. Sarah Jules nearly choked on her coffee when she read Margaret's legal arguments. "She's representing herself in a civil case while facing federal criminal charges," Sarah laughed. "This woman has achieved a level of self-destruction that's almost artistic." But Margaret's lawsuit strategy had a vicious twist. She'd timed the filing to coincide with a false rumor campaign claiming I was planning to subdivide my property into a trailer park. The smell of fresh panic spread through the neighborhood as property values suddenly seemed threatened by imaginary mobile homes. Tuesday brought Margaret's most dangerous gamble yet. She attempted to bribe County Tax Assessor Maria Santos with inside information about upcoming property reassessments, offering to share confidential real estate market data in exchange for favorable treatment of her agricultural exemption claims. Santos, a 15-year government veteran who'd seen every corruption attempt imaginable, immediately contacted the FBI's Public Corruption Task Force. Their investigation had expanded beyond simple tax fraud into a comprehensive examination of Margaret's systematic abuse of government authority. "Ma'am, what you're proposing constitutes felony bribery of a public official," Santos told Margaret while federal agents monitored the conversation from the parking lot. "I'm required to report this contact to law enforcement immediately." Margaret's response revealed how completely she'd lost touch with reality. She increased her bribe offer and suggested they could work together to target other property owners for aggressive reassessment. Federal agents arrested Margaret in the county parking lot 30 minutes later. The arrest should have ended her campaign, but Margaret made bail within 6 hours and immediately launched her most vicious attack yet, targeting my children directly through social media harassment designed to humiliate them at school. She created fake Instagram accounts posting doctored photos of my kids with captions claiming their father was under criminal investigation for property theft. The images, clearly manipulated to suggest drug use and criminal behavior, spread through the high school social network like digital poison. Jake called me from school Wednesday afternoon, his voice shaking with fury and embarrassment. "Dad, everyone's asking if you're going to jail. Some girl showed me her phone with pictures that aren't even real." Emma faced worse harassment. Margaret had somehow obtained photos from Emma's soccer team and digitally altered them to suggest inappropriate behavior. The fake images were spreading through teenage social media faster than I could document them for evidence. This wasn't property warfare anymore. Margaret had declared war on my children. I contacted Detective Rodriguez immediately, my military training keeping my voice steady while rage burned through every nerve. "She's targeting minors with fake sexual imagery. This crosses every legal line that exists." "Sir, we're treating this as aggravated harassment of minors," Rodriguez confirmed. "FBI Cybercrimes Division is already tracking the fake accounts. Creating sexualized images of children, even digitally altered ones, carries federal charges under multiple statutes." Margaret had just committed felonies that would put her on federal watch lists for the rest of her life. But while Margaret was destroying herself with increasingly desperate criminal behavior, the community was rallying around my family with support that restored my faith in human decency. Frank organized a neighborhood watch rotation, ensuring my kids walked safely to and from the school bus. Janet used her retired teacher connections to alert school administrators about the social media harassment. David's tech skills helped document and preserve evidence of Margaret's fake accounts before they could be deleted. Thursday brought Margaret's final desperate move. She attempted to hire a private investigator to gather criminal evidence against me, apparently believing that paying someone else to harass my family would somehow be legal. The PI, a retired police officer named Tom Jules, no relation to my attorney, listened to Margaret's request for 15 minutes before terminating the meeting and immediately contacting law enforcement. "Ma'am, what you're describing constitutes criminal stalking and harassment," Jules told Margaret while recording their conversation. "I'm a licensed professional, not a criminal accomplice. This conversation is being reported to the appropriate authorities." Margaret's response was to offer Jules $5,000 in cash to investigate my military service record and divorce proceedings for character assassination evidence. Chen handed the cash directly to FBI agents waiting in his office parking lot. By Friday evening, Margaret faced federal charges for corruption, bribery, cyber harassment of minors, and solicitation of criminal stalking. Her bail was revoked after prosecutors argued she posed an ongoing threat to community safety. The woman who'd started this war by claiming my trail was community property now sat in federal custody, facing potential decades in prison for crimes she'd committed trying to steal 50 feet of walking path. Margaret's last text message before her arrest, sent to 3 neighbors at 3 a.m. Friday morning, read, "I will destroy him, even if it destroys me." Mission accomplished, Margaret. You destroyed yourself completely while only making me stronger. The war was essentially over, but the public execution of Margaret's reputation was about to begin. The emergency city council meeting was supposed to address HOA oversight and community safety concerns, but it turned into the most dramatic public meltdown in our town's history. City Hall's main chamber, normally home to boring zoning debates and budget discussions, was packed beyond capacity. Standing room only with 40-plus neighbors, 3 local news crews, and enough tension to power the building's lights. The smell of nervous sweat mixed with coffee and the musty scent of old government furniture as people squeezed into every available space. Margaret arrived alone, her designer clothes wrinkled and her usually perfect hair showing gray roots she'd never let anyone see before. She clutched a manila folder like a lifeline, her hands visibly shaking as she surveyed the crowd that had once feared her authority. The irony was delicious. Margaret had demanded this public forum to expose the criminal conspiracy against her, not realizing she was about to confess to federal crimes on live television. City Attorney Rebecca Walsh called the session to order while County Surveyor Pete Rodriguez set up his laser measurement equipment near the microphone. Police Chief Davis positioned himself strategically near the exit, and FBI agent Sarah Kim sat in the back row with a notebook that would become evidence in Margaret's federal trial. Margaret spoke first, and her opening statement revealed how completely she'd lost touch with reality. "Ladies and gentlemen, I stand before you as the victim of a coordinated attack on neighborhood values and property rights, she announced, her voice carrying across the packed chamber. This newcomer has used veteran privilege and political connections to intimidate longtime residents and destroy community traditions. She pulled out her laminated map, the same obviously doctored document she'd shown me months earlier, and presented it like evidence in a murder trial. This trail has been community property since our neighborhood was established. I have documentation proving decades of shared maintenance and public access. The audience murmured skeptically as Margaret's map was projected onto the wall screen. Even from 30 feet away, you could see the correction fluid where she'd redrawn property lines. Mr. Thompson has illegally installed private property signs on community land, Margaret continued, gaining confidence from her own words. He's threatened established residents with lawsuits and criminal charges for exercising traditional neighborhood rights. Margaret's voice grew stronger as she warmed to her persecution narrative. This man has filed false reports with government agencies, manipulated public records, and used military intimidation tactics to steal property that rightfully belongs to our community. Then she made the fatal mistake that would seal her fate forever. I have witnesses who will testify that this trail has been maintained by Homeowner Association funds since 2008, Margaret declared proudly. Our community has invested thousands of dollars in improvements that this individual is now claiming as his private property. County Surveyor Rodriguez stood up with his laser measurement device and a professional report that was about to destroy Margaret's world. "Ma'am, I've completed GPS verification of the property boundaries in question," Rodriguez announced, his voice carrying the authority of mathematical precision. "The trail in question lies entirely within Mr. Thompson's legal property lines, as established by the original 1987 survey and confirmed by modern satellite positioning." Rodriguez's laser measurements, projected live onto the wall screen, showed Margaret's claims were off by over 50 feet. Her community property was completely within my boundaries, down to the inch. Furthermore, Rodriguez continued, the HOA incorporation documents show formation in March 2015, 7 years after the alleged community maintenance claims began. No legal entity existed to authorize the claimed improvements. But the real devastation came when FBI agent Kim stood to address the chamber. "Ladies and gentlemen, I'm Agent Sarah Kim with the FBI's Public Corruption Task Force," she announced, her federal credentials commanding immediate silence. "Ms. Thornfield is currently under federal investigation for tax fraud, bribery of public officials, and cyber harassment of minors." Agent Kim's words hit the chamber like a thunderbolt. Margaret's face went pale as the implications sank in. Her persecution narrative had just become a federal criminal case, broadcast live on local television. The evidence presented tonight confirms fraudulent claims about property ownership, systematic tax evasion through false agricultural exemptions, and conspiracy to defraud multiple government agencies, Agent Kim continued. Margaret tried to interrupt, but Chief Davis stepped forward with handcuffs. Furthermore, audio evidence obtained through federal investigation shows Ms. Thornfield attempting to bribe county officials and soliciting criminal harassment of neighboring families. The chamber erupted as Margaret realized she'd just confessed to her crimes on live television, with federal agents documenting every word. "This is a conspiracy," Margaret screamed as Chief Davis approached her. "You're all working together to destroy an honest citizen who is protecting neighborhood values." But her protest stopped abruptly when Agent Kim played audio recording of Margaret offering bribes to county officials, her own voice, captured by federal surveillance, destroying her credibility completely. "Margaret Thornfield, you're under arrest for conspiracy to defraud the United States government," Chief Davis announced as he placed her in handcuffs before a room full of neighbors and television cameras. Margaret's final words before being led away were broadcast live to 3 counties. "I'll destroy all of you, even if it destroys me." As the chamber doors closed behind Margaret's arrest, Frank stood up and received thunderous applause for announcing the formation of our new neighborhood association, one based on voluntary cooperation instead of authoritarian harassment. The war was over. Justice had been served live on television, and Margaret's suburban kingdom had collapsed in the most public way imaginable. Victory tasted like freedom and smelled like morning coffee at City Hall. 6 months later, the courtroom smelled like justice and Margaret's expensive lawyer's desperation. Federal Judge Patricia Williams sentenced Margaret to 18 months in federal prison, 3 years supervised probation, and full restitution of $32,000 in fraudulent tax savings plus penalties. The IRS whistleblower program awarded me 15% of recovered funds, enough to build the kids a proper workshop where their old treehouse used to stand. Margaret's real estate license was permanently revoked. Her divorce finalized with her husband keeping the dental practice while she kept the debt from legal fees. The BMW that got crushed by her sabotage tree was totaled, leaving her with a bus pass and a federal conviction that would follow her forever. But the real victory wasn't Margaret's downfall. It was watching my community transform from a fear-based HOA dictatorship into something beautiful. Frank was unanimously elected president of our new neighborhood association, which meets monthly for potluck dinners instead of violation hearings. Our bylaws fit on a single page and focus on voluntary cooperation, not architectural control. No fines, no violations, no clipboard-wielding enforcers measuring mailbox heights at dawn. The trail became our neighborhood's gathering place instead of a source of conflict. Evening walks turned into impromptu conversations between neighbors who'd been too scared to talk during Margaret's reign. Kids built forts in the woods while parents shared beers and actually got to know each other. My teenagers, who'd initially been embarrassed by the whole drama, now bragged to their friends about living in the house that defeated the HOA from hell. Jake learned enough about property law to help his girlfriend's family fight a similar dispute 2 counties over. Emma started a school project documenting HOA abuse that won the state social justice competition. The Property Rights Defense Fund grew beyond anything I'd imagined. We've helped 12 families fight fraudulent HOA claims, assisted 3 seniors with property tax appeals, and funded legal workshops that have reached over 200 homeowners across 3 states. The local veterans organization now sponsors quarterly Know Your Rights seminars where we teach the research techniques that saved my property. The most important lesson: government records contain everything you need to verify legitimate claims versus fraudulent ones, but you must specifically request complete documentation and know which questions to ask. Janet reopened her daycare business and now runs it from a beautiful new facility that the neighborhood helped fund. David and his wife finally got their fence built, with voluntary help from 8 neighbors who showed up on installation day with tools and coolers full of beer. Margaret's former house sold to a young teacher and her firefighter husband who host the best block parties our street has ever seen. The new owners planted wildflowers where Margaret's obsessively manicured lawn used to be, and butterflies have returned to our neighborhood for the first time in years. But the sweetest justice came from an unexpected source: Dorothy's nephew, the attorney who'd rushed through my closing and failed to mention the HOA complications, contacted me with a formal apology and a check for $5,000 to make things right after learning about Margaret's fraud. Turns out he'd been getting pressure from Margaret for months before my purchase, and guilt had been eating him alive. The money went straight into our defense fund, where it's already helping another veteran fight a similar property scam in the next county. 3 months ago, I got a letter from Margaret in federal prison. She'd apparently found religion and wanted to apologize for getting carried away with neighborhood pride. The letter asked for my forgiveness and hinted that she'd learned valuable lessons about respecting others' property rights. I didn't respond. Some lessons are too expensive to teach twice. Last week brought the best news yet. The state legislature passed new HOA oversight legislation partly inspired by our case. Homeowner associations now face criminal penalties for filing false government reports, and residents have stronger appeal rights against fraudulent violations. Margaret's legacy became stronger legal protection for future families facing similar predators. This weekend, we're hosting our 2nd annual Trail Festival, a community celebration featuring local food trucks, live music, and guided nature walks through the woods that started this whole adventure. Last year's festival raised $3,000 for the Property Rights Fund and brought together neighbors from 6 surrounding communities. My trail, the 50-foot strip of woods that Margaret tried to steal, now represents something bigger than property ownership. It's become a symbol of what happens when communities stand up to bullies and fight for what's right. The morning coffee tastes better when you're drinking it on your own land, surrounded by neighbors who became friends through shared struggle. The sound of kids laughing in trees their parents helped them build echoes through woods that are finally, legally, peacefully mine. If you've got an HOA horror story, drop it in the comments below. The wildest ones might become future episodes, and sharing your experience helps other people recognize the warning signs before they become victims. Hit that subscribe button and ring the notification bell because somewhere out there, another Margaret is measuring someone's mailbox at 6 a.m., and knowledge is the best defense against property predators who think they can steal your American dream. Remember, your property rights are worth fighting for, your community is stronger than individual bullies, and sometimes the best victory is watching karma work with a little help from federal law enforcement. Thanks for joining me on this journey from nightmare neighbor to neighborhood hero. See you next time, when I'll tell you about the city councilman who tried to steal my water rights using fake environmental lawsuits. Wait until you hear how that story ends.